1990 family portrait is discovered, and historians are startled when they enlarge the image of the mother's hand. Thomas Red found the photograph in a pile of estate sale items at his antique shop in Philadelphia. The afternoon light was coming through the dusty windows when he spotted a large wooden frame leaning against a cracked mirror. Behind the cloudy glass was a formal Victorian family portrait. A stern father stood behind a seated mother with 3 children arranged around them in their finest clothes. Thomas had handled hundreds of old photographs and thought this one seemed ordinary at first, probably worth $50 to a collector. But something about the mother's right hand gripping the arm of the chair bothered him. An instinct built over 20 years in the business told him to look closer. He grabbed his jeweler's loupe and examined the photograph. Even through the faded brown tones, he could see something was wrong with the mother's hand. Then looked rough and uneven. There were marks that were not soft wrinkles, but something much harsher. He carried the photograph to his scanner and transferred the file to his computer. He zoomed in on the mother's right hand until it filled his whole screen. His breath caught. The hand was covered in deep scars, bad burns that had healed poorly, leaving the skin rough and discolored. The fingers were slightly bent as if they could not straighten all the way. Along the back of the hand were share scars, small round marks in an almost geometric pattern. In all his years, Thomas had never seen anything like this. The formal portrait was meant to show this family at their best, yet the mother's hand told a story of pain that contradicted everything. Thomas spent the next morning at the Philadelphia City Archives searching through records from 1890. He found the studio name in an old business directory, Whitmore & Sons, 1247 Chestnut Street, fine portrait photography, established in 78. But the business records had been destroyed by fire in 1904, so there were no customer records to identify the family. An archivist named Patricia Morrison studied the high-resolution printout and lingered on the mother's hand. She told Thomas she had seen similar injuries in industrial accident reports from that era. Women worked 12 to 14-hour days in garment factories operating dangerous machinery. Burns from steam presses and puncture wounds from sewing machine needles were uncommon. But she pointed out that women with injuries this severe rarely sat for formal portraits because studio photography was expensive. This woman was dressed like an upper middle class, which did not make sense for a factory worker. Patricia suggested Thomas contact Dr. Helen Vasquez at Temple University, who specialized in women's labor history. Dr. Vasquez spread out old photographs of garment workers from the 1890s on her desk. In every image where hands were visible, Thomas could see scars and burns and deformities similar to those in his portrait. But those women were clearly poor, dressed in work clothes, standing in dirty factories. Dr. Vasquez explained that Philadelphia had dozens of garment factories south of Market Street with terrible conditions. Steam presses caused severe burns and industrial sewing machines sent broken needles through workers' hands. She said the woman in Thomas's portrait had the injuries of a factory worker but was dressed like someone from a completely different social class. She also mentioned that in 1889 and 1890, there were several major strikes at garment factories, and most were crushed, but a few women leaders had emerged. She thought it was possible the woman in the portrait had been involved in organizing. Thomas went to the Pennsylvania Historical Society and searched through boxes of records from the Hartley Garment Company, one of the largest manufacturers at the time. The employment ledgers were filled with cramped handwriting, names, wages, and hours. The pay was shockingly low, around $4.50 a week for 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Thomas found entries mentioning injuries. One woman had her hand burned by a press, was unable to work for 3 weeks, and had her wages docked. The casual cruelty of these notes showed that women hurt on dangerous machines were forced to work through pain or lose money they could not afford to lose. An assistant archivist named Robert remembered that they had been a strike at the Hartley factory in 1890 and brought Thomas a thin folder. Inside were management memos, a list of workers suspected of organizing, and a newspaper clipping from the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin dated May 15, 1890. The headline read that lady garment workers had walked off their jobs demanding better treatment. Thomas read that about 40 women had stopped work and gathered outside demanding shorter hours, safer conditions, and fair treatment of injured workers. And one paragraph made his pulse race. The workers were led by Mrs. Elizabeth Brennan, age 29, a steam press operator who had worked at Hartley for nearly 8 years. She had been fired immediately and removed by police. The management memo listed Elizabeth at the top with the word ringleader, and someone had written in red ink that she was blacklisted and never to be rehired under any circumstances. Thomas sat back staring at the name. He had found her. Over the next week, Thomas pieced together Elizabeth's life from broken records. The 1900 census showed her married to James Brennan with 3 children named Margaret, William, and Dorothy. But the timeline troubled him. Elizabeth was fired and blacklisted in May 1890, and James had resigned from his position as a factory foreman just days later. A management memo dated May 18th stated that any employee associating with strike organizers would be terminated immediately. Thomas could picture the impossible choice James had faced. He could keep his job by turning his back on his wife or lose everything by standing with her. He chose Elizabeth, yet somehow they had scraped together enough money for that formal portrait despite being unemployed and blacklisted. After hours searching modern genealogy records, Thomas found a living descendant. William, the boy in the portrait, had lived until 1972 and had 3 children. One of them, Patricia Hughes, was 74 years old and living in a suburb west of Philadelphia. Thomas called, and there was a long silence when he explained why he was calling. Patricia said he was the first person outside her family who had ever asked about Elizabeth. She invited him to her house and told him to come right away. Patricia Hughes was a tall woman with white hair and sharp blue eyes that reminded Thomas of Elizabeth's gaze. When he unwrapped the portrait and set it on her coffee table, she put her hand to her mouth and whispered that she had heard about this photograph her entire life but never thought she would actually see it. Her grandfather William had told stories about it. The family had lost it during the Depression in the 1930s when they had to sell their house. He always said it was important and had regretted losing it. Patricia brought out a worn leather box that had belonged to Elizabeth. Inside was a small notebook bound in faded cloth that Elizabeth had used during the strike. The pages were filled with her handwriting, lists of names, notes about working conditions, and drafts of letters. One page listed grievances including burns from broken steam presses, no pay for injuries, docked wages for healing time, and children working 12-hour days. Another page showed demands for a 10-hour workday, safe equipment, fair compensation for injuries, and no hiring of children under 14. Thomas said quietly that these demands were decades ahead of their time and most did not become law until the 1930s. Patricia shared the full family story, and Elizabeth was born in 1861 to Irish immigrant parents in Philadelphia. Her father was a dock worker who died in an accident when she was 12. She started working in garment factories at 13 to help her family survive. By 20, she had become skilled at operating steam presses, one of the more dangerous but better-paying jobs. She got her first serious burn at 17 when a broken valve released boiling steam. The factory refused to pay for medical treatment, so she wrapped the burn in rags and kept working because missing shifts meant losing money she could not afford to lose. The burns on her hand in the photograph were from multiple accidents over years. Each time the factory blamed her for carelessness, cut her wages, and forced her back before she had healed. Elizabeth had tried organizing smaller actions before the 1890 strike, including petitions and work slowdowns. But each effort was crushed and participants were punished. She persisted and secretly built trust among workers across several departments. The 1890 strike was her boldest move. She coordinated with women to all walk off their jobs at the same time to overwhelm management's ability to replace them. Patricia showed Thomas a letter Elizabeth had written to her sister in 1891, describing those 2 days when the factory was completely shut down. Elizabeth wrote that the women stood in the streets singing hymns and folk songs, sharing stories about their injuries and their children who never saw them, because they worked from dawn to dark. For 2 days, she said they were not just workers to be used and thrown away, but human beings demanding dignity. She wrote that even though they lost, those 2 days mattered because they tried. The strike collapsed after 10 days. The factory brought in replacement workers from other cities. Some strikers had children who were literally hungry and could not afford to stay out. Management spread rumors that the factory would close permanently, women started, going back one by one. Elizabeth was singled out and made an example. She was publicly fired, physically removed by police, and blacklisted across Philadelphia's entire garment industry. James had a good position as a foreman, earning $18 a week. He could have kept his job by disavowing Elizabeth, but he loved her and walked out the same day she was fired. They borrowed money from friends and took odd jobs for months, struggling to survive. Eventually, Elizabeth opened a small tailoring shop called Brennan Tailoring and Alterations. It was not much, but it gave her independence. She never stopped advocating for workers, attending meetings and supporting strikes into the 1900s and 1910s as the labor movement gained strength. Patricia explained the most important part of the story. Elizabeth had insisted on that formal portrait right after being fired, even though they had almost no money. She wanted a record of who they were at that moment. A woman with scarred hands and factory work, a man who had chosen love and principle over security, and their children who would grow up knowing their parents had stood for something. Elizabeth knew the factory owners wanted her to disappear, so she did the opposite. She wore her finest dress, held her head high, and deliberately let her scarred hands show because she wanted people to see what factory work cost and what fighting back cost. She wanted future generations to know that ordinary people could be heroic. And Patricia pulled out one more document, a newspaper clipping from 1916. The headline read that veteran labor advocate Elizabeth Brennan spoke at a workers' rally. Elizabeth was in her mid-50s by then and had been invited to speak about her experiences in the 1890 strike. The article quoted her speech. She told the crowd that 26 years earlier she had stood outside a factory with 40 brave women demanding basic rights. They were defeated, fired, blacklisted, and threatened, but they had planted a seed that day, and looking at the gathered crowd she could see it had grown into something unstoppable. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911 had shocked the nation and forced change. Elizabeth lived to see labor protection laws passed in the 1920s and 1930s that matched every demand she had written in her notebook decades earlier. She died peacefully in 1932 at 71, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. All three of her children carried her values. And forward, Margaret became a teacher active in the teachers' union. William became a labor lawyer representing workers. Dorothy became a social worker helping poor families. Thomas and Patricia donated the portrait and all the documents to the Philadelphia Workers' History Museum and created an exhibition together. The portrait was professionally restored and hung at eye level so visitors could see every detail, including the scarred hands. The displays included Elizabeth's notebook, strike documents, newspaper clippings, letters, and photographs of garment workers. Interactive screens let visitors explore factory conditions and labor history. Thousands of people came in the first month. Teachers brought school groups and labor unions held events at the museum. The photograph of Elizabeth's scarred hands became a powerful symbol that spread on social media. One day, Thomas stood beside Patricia watching a young girl stare at the portrait. The girl turned to her mother and asked why, and the woman had let her hurt hand show in the picture. Was she not embarrassed? Her mother knelt down and explained that Elizabeth showed her hands because she was proud of what she had done. She wanted people to know she had worked hard and stood up for what was right. She was not ashamed, she was brave. The girl looked back at the portrait and said quietly that she looked strong. Thomas felt a lump in his throat knowing that little girl would remember this moment. Elizabeth had gotten exactly what she wanted. Her scarred hands, once a mark of cruelty forced by factory owners, had become a symbol of dignity, resistance, and hope. And her story, nearly lost to time, would now inspire generations to come.